check. One, two, three.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's get the show on the road. I'm Terry O'Neill. I'm the president of the National Organization for Women. And I am so thrilled to welcome each and every one of you to New Orleans. It's a wonderful city. And I hope that you've had some time to explore the city a little bit before we have our conference here. And if not beforehand, then stick around a little bit later and check it out. One thing you really won't be able to do in New Orleans is get a bad meal. So I encourage you to go check it out. Thank you all so much for being here. This is the 2015 National Now Annual Conference. We're going to have a series of wonderful, amazing plenary sessions. We'll talk about what's going to happen later in the day. Right now, I am thrilled to introduce two legislators, Louisiana legislators, who have been in day after day, week after week, fighting for the rights of women in Louisiana. They are here to welcome us to their great state and to this great city. And I want to hear from them in just a moment. Before I do, I want to extend very, very special thanks to the president of Louisiana Now and New Orleans Now, Charlotte Clausen. If you would come up. Amazing for the past year getting ready for this conference. Every other week on a phone call with the National Action Center staff, working on this piece of logistics, that piece of logistics, in and out with us. She's been absolutely wonderful, and it has been a real pleasure for me to work with her, so I can't thank you enough.
Yes, thank you.
Do you want to say something? Say thank you. You're welcome.
I'd like to welcome everyone, and I do hope you enjoy the city. I know we're kind of quirky and we're kind of odd sometimes, but I think you're going to have a really good time. And I know we're in a beautiful hotel, and it's just right down the street from me. And no, I did not pick that, so I was very, very lucky. I can walk here. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a great conference weekend.
And now I'd like to introduce our first member of the Louisiana Legislature, Pam Smith. Pat, God, I'm so sorry, Pat Smith. Please come up. Oh, and if you'd rather speak at the podium or sitting at the chair, it doesn't matter. More comfortable, okay.
Good morning.
There we go.
First of all, I want to welcome all of you here to the Big Easy. Whether you came from around the corner to get here, or you traveled through the air, or however you got here, you're here to discuss some very, very important issues that we face as women in our country, not just in Louisiana, but in our country. I'm from Baton Rouge, and my district is in the Baton Rouge area. It covers the capital downtown area. And we just finished our session a few days ago on the 11th of June, and we did have a very hellacious session, I must say, to say the least. Nonetheless, we did tackle some of our women's issues during this particular session. Of course, we tried to get equal pay passed again. Did not pass. Passed the Senate, not the House. Our House members are just, I don't know what to say about them. But we've also worked on fair wages for individuals, making sure that women and men do get fair wages. Yes. We've worked on issues, and I've worked on issues from sex education for our youngsters, sexual abuse, task force, trying to get that restarted in Louisiana. We have issues in Louisiana such as dealing with women's reproductive rights. We have a plethora of issues that we deal with that are dealing with women's rights. We can't fix them all, and we can't fix them all because we have too many men in our legislature who truly don't understand us. And I just have to say that. They don't understand the emotions, they don't understand the fact that we know that we have a place in not only the legislature, not only in Louisiana, but in this country. We contribute to this country, and we should be able to get the same rights as everyone else. And I know that throughout my tenure as a legislator, I will continue to work on those rights for women in Louisiana. And hopefully at some point in time, in fact, there's one, I think Karen's going to talk about that one, but we have become first in one thing that we've done, and that is looking at sexual abuse on college campuses. So I hope we can become first in a number of other things as we deal with our issues on individual issues that women face in Louisiana, and we'll continue to work on that. So I welcome you here. You have a lot of things to talk about, a lot of recommendations to make, being a part of the solution and not the problem, and we welcome you, and we will welcome recommendations from you for our next legislative session. Thank you.
This is a little different than, I'm not good at sitting down and talking. I'm usually trying to sleep by the time I sit down.
I just wanted to introduce you real quick. And it's my real pleasure to introduce Karen St. Germain from the Plaquemine.
From Pierreport, Louisiana.
From Pierreport, Louisiana. And she's going to talk about what she's been doing for Louisiana. Thank you. Sorry.
If I sound a little strange, if you listen to Troy Landrieu on Swamp People ever, he would be my second cousin, and I'm from the same place. Lots of times I think that's why people ask me to speak. It's just a little part of a different culture they want y'all to be part of. Welcome, everyone. What a great pleasure it is for you all to be here. Makes me feel like we actually have the attention of the entire nation sitting here helping together solve the problems of women. We have had way too many issues. And Representative Smith, I want to tell you, she said a little, she has a lot more to say. She has been a fighter for women's rights from the prison system all the way back to the legislature. And I'll tell you a funny, just quick funny story about the one particular bill, because we do have problems making our counterparts that happen to be men, not all of them, but too many, to understand what's happening. And we were having a discussion about equal pay. And they have a legislator, and I won't mention his name because he'll come shoot me later, that we were voting for equal pay, and we were having a serious discussion, and Representative Helena Marino, who's been instrumental in lots of legislation, including that one, were saying all the things that it meant. And my husband owns a business. We've been in business, his family, I look good for 104, right? We've been in a family business for 104 years. He's never once said, I think we have 85 employees and maybe 25 are men, so he better pay attention to the equal pay. And it won't be getting any grief from me. Well, we're sitting there, we're having the discussion, we're having questions, and then the vote went up. And two guys that I've been knowing for 20-something years, because I've actually been in this, not position, but in the legislature in different positions for 26 years, they voted no. And I ran up to the desk like my mama's child, and I stuck my finger in his face, which I do not do often, but that's the Cajun that comes out of me, and said, "What in the world do you think you're doing? What in the hell's going on? You don't have a wife, you don't have a mama, you don't have a sister, you don't have any nieces? Well, if you do, I'm going to find him." But I do know his wife. And he just kept shaking his head. Well, I promise you, that's not usually the tactic as a legislator you want to take, right? But they never voted against equal pay again, any equal pay bill. It's not one I'd recommend to all my fellow women legislators, but it worked. If you take two down at a time, that's okay. One of one of the major issues that we had that actually was accomplished this year that we all feel really proud of, and it was Representative Helena Moreno's legislation on rape, it being taken serious from the time the officer or whoever takes you to the hospital, from the hospital to an easily accessible rape kit, and for you going home and having to deal with the traumas that you already have to deal with, and having the hospital not send you a darn bill. It astounded me that so many women, by the time they got that bill, was close to $4,000 or $5,000. Unbelievable. And Representative Smith and Representative Heleno and several of us stood as a Louisiana Women's Caucus and got together our group, and that doesn't happen very often. That we all, you know how women are, we don't always stick together, but we're there when we need each other. And this was a want and a need. You know, women always say that as mothers, we are mothers, we are sisters, we have family, no matter if they're your direct family or very, very close. We want to take care of everything. Men kind of center on one thing at a time, and that's okay, unless they're like my oldest son who's ADHD, but they usually center on one thing at a time, and we take care of the stuff back home most of the time. You come home to a house that's been cleaned by you, or if you have a good job, it's cleaned by some other woman. So at the end of the day, we don't quite get that respect from the men because they can't take us out of the house and put us in that legislative seat. Now, I've earned my stripes. 26 years of this, but I grew up with 9 guys around my house, no women. So I either played with the boys or I didn't. So I had an advantage. I had a daddy that was the first fire chief. This is Louisiana, rural Louisiana. First fire chief, big deal. You walked with your daddy everywhere if you did anything. At the end of the day, I always kind of thought he was crazy. Well, look at me. He would say I'm crazier. They were older. I was born when both my parents were 42, but I learned a lot from them. And I wish for you that while you're here in Louisiana, that you have the best time in the world, and you bring back to us the best information that we can use in the future. Because I may be termed out this year, but I promise you, I will be citizen policy nut for women. You can take away the title. Honestly, I don't really care about the title. They can take away the title as long as they keep me able to be involved. And I know people like Representative Smith and other women legislators are not going to mind me visiting every once in a while. Not too often, but every once in a while. Welcome, have fun. Don't eat too much, but drink a little bit. And don't drive. Thank you all very much. Welcome. Have a great weekend.
Thank you both, Representative St. Germain and Representative Smith. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. I would like to say that Mayor Landrieu's, Mitch Landrieu's office, the mayor did try to get here. Their office emailed us just this morning saying that they were not able to come and welcome us, but they did want us to know there's a welcome letter in your program book. And he's very, very thrilled that we're here in New Orleans, so we appreciate his welcoming, and we're sorry to miss him here at the conference. We are going to, I think it's about almost 10 o'clock, so we are going to move on to our 10 o'clock plenary session in just a couple of minutes. So, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, you want that?
Oh, here.
Okay.
He's good.
Thank you. All right.
Oh, no, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
All right, so they'll give us a signal, I guess, whether it works or not.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit in the middle or?
Sorry? Welcome back, everyone. Good morning. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to our 10 o'clock plenary session. It's going to be a dynamic discussion about what we need to do at the grassroots level, organizing for change in light of the crisis, frankly, that is facing women and women of color in particular. We're going to have an amazing conversation now with two amazing women. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing them. To my immediate right is Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. I think everyone in the room knows Professor Crenshaw. And to my far right, Amy Thorne Thompson. She is the Vice President for External Outreach for Advocates for Youth. And Amy is going to talk to us a little bit about what Advocates for Youth do, and then we'll start having a conversation. All the now chapters that are represented in this room are already engaged in the struggle. What we want to talk about is more strategies, more tactics, more what can be done on the grassroots level to address the crisis that we're facing. So without any further ado, let's get started, and I'll ask Amy to open us up.
Good morning. Buenos días. I am very, very happy to be here with you today. I think I told you this, Terry, that the very first conference I ever went to of any kind was a NOW conference back in about 1990, 1991. I was a high school senior, and it was my first interaction, my first experience being in an activist space. And little did I know that it would point to my future as an activist. So there's a certain homecoming being here with you today, so thank you for allowing me to be with you. I also want to acknowledge Professor Crenshaw because her work on intersectionality has not only shaped my activism, it's shaped my life and the way I do the work. And so I want to acknowledge being on stage with you here today as a really profound moment for me and for many of the young people I work with and serve every day. And then lastly, I want to be fully honest and transparent with you. As excited as I am to be here with you today, I'm also here with a heavy heart. It is a difficult moment, I think, to be a social justice activist, and for me as a woman of color, as a Latina from the Caribbean, to see what is happening in La República Dominicana, to Haitians, to Dominicans of Haitian descent, and how they are being stripped of their dignity, of their statehood, being expelled from their home and deported to another home in support of anti-blackness and white supremacy is unfathomable still in this age. To see what has happened in Charleston, South Carolina, to see another black church in the South attacked. These are not acts of lone insanity. These are acts that support white supremacy, that dehumanize our brothers and sisters, that affect all of us, and so I have to bring that into the room to acknowledge that, and as happy as I am to be with you, it's a sad moment and it's a hard time, and if I get a little emotional, I hope you'll forgive me, but together, these are the issues that affect all of us in one way, shape, or form, and I think we have to acknowledge the fights that we face in multiple places. So thank you for giving me this space to acknowledge that. As Terry said, I am Vice President at Advocates for Youth, where we partner with young people, adult allies, and youth-serving organizations to advocate for policies and champion programs that give young people the right to sexual health information, confidential, accessible, and affordable sexual health services, and the opportunity to achieve sexual health equity for all our young people. Thank you. And so just as you all know, every movement needs its elders and its pioneers, right? We need the people who think of a world and a time that is bigger than us, that is better than what we have right now. They are the catalysts for our social justice movements, whether it is for reproductive justice, economic justice, racial justice. These are the people who put things in place for us and point out a path that leads us, hopefully, to a better place. For me, those are people like Dolores Huerta, a co-founder of United Farm Workers of America, who, by the way, was the one who coined the phrase, "Si se puede." All due respect to Cesar Chavez, but that was Dolores. Those pioneers include Sylvia Rivera and other trans women of color and gender nonconforming people of color who fought back against constant police harassment and violence in New York City that set off the Stonewall riots that have ushered in the modern LGBTQ liberation movement. And I want to emphasize, it was the Stonewall riots, not the Stonewall petition, not the Stonewall lobby day, but the Stonewall riots that helped change the face of what LGBTQ people in New York City and around the country were experiencing. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge one of the mothers of the movement that I call home, reproductive justice, and that's Loretta Ross.
Yes.
I am proud to call her my colleague and my friend. She gave us the words reproductive justice, helped bring about the framework of reproductive justice, and really, through her amazing work and her body and her spirit, gave us the beginnings of the reproductive justice movement. So for me, those elders are important because they laid out a path and they laid out foundations that I could walk on, and I am here standing on their shoulders. But just as every movement needs elders, every movement needs young people. It's the young people who give life to our collective dreams by doing the work, by elevating the work, by criticizing the work, and sometimes reimagining the work so that we can all take one step closer to justice. So for me, for the last 12 years, my work has revolved around working alongside young people to expand and protect their access to reproductive justice. And I've had the opportunity to see any number of young people create change in their communities and to exert leadership that has made a difference for other young people around the country. I can tell you about Ana Sanz. Ana is a student at FAMU. For those of you who don't know, that's Florida Agricultural and Mechanical School. It is the largest historically black college in the nation. And she and other students set out on a 2-year campaign to amend their school's anti-discrimination policies to include gender identity and sexual orientation. For 2 years, they organized, they fought, they protested, they met, they signed petitions, anything and everything you can think of. And just last year, they successfully changed FAMU's policies to include all their students so that all students on the campus could thrive. I could tell you about Carly and our activists at the University of Michigan, who set out to change, Michigan. They set out to change the conversation around abortion on their campus, one that was devoid of rhetoric and recentered the real lived experiences of people who have abortions. They held an abortion speak out that attracted 300 people on their campus. It was the first one they had ever held. People shared stories, people stood in support and solidarity with each other, and they made a commitment to end the stigma and shame that surrounds abortion. And finally, let me tell you about Macomb, Mississippi. Anyone from Mississippi? All right, well, this may be my favorite story. Macomb, Mississippi is a city of about 14,000 14,000 people. It's about 80 miles outside of Jackson, the state capital. One of our young people, Omar, has been working tirelessly to educate, organize, and persuade school board members to not support abstinence-only supposed sex education any longer. So, and if any of you know what abstinence-only programs are like, you realize that they demonize contraception, they demonize LGBTQ people, they reinforce the most awful of gender stereotypes, and they set up our young people on a dangerous path because they don't have the information, tools, and resources they need to navigate their lives. Omar met with students, met with the school board, met with the superintendent, who I guess is a member of his church. And just last month, just before his high school graduation, the Macomb School Board voted to adopt an abstinence plus policy and curriculum for all the students in Macomb, Mississippi. That's a high school student. A high school student led that change. And I could tell you so many more examples. I could talk to you about Shay in Oakland, and James in Houston, and Kieran in Boston. I could tell you about all the amazing work they're doing. But I could also tell you about the work I'm sure many of you see in your communities already. We could talk about the Dreamers. We could talk about the young leaders in Baltimore and in Ferguson and part of Black Lives Matter. And right here in New Orleans, we could talk about VELA and Louisiana Youth for Truth Council and Breakout and all the amazing work they're doing here in Louisiana to support young people. So I'm gonna end with just a couple of requests, because I would be a terrible organizer and activist if I didn't ask you to do something, right? These are young people who are making change in their communities right now, in our communities right now. So I'm gonna ask you to do two things. The first, stop asking, where are the young people? I repeat, stop asking, where are the young people? They are where they have always been, in the heart of our movements, doing the work that needs to be done. They are registering people to vote. They are escorting at local abortion clinics. They are advocating for comprehensive sex ed. They're running drop-in centers for homeless LGBT youth. They are here. They have always been here. Some of us came through to this work as young people. They are here if we open our eyes and acknowledge that the work may look different, and young people may look different, but young people have always been here and a part of our movements. The second thing I will ask you is, I would say as an adult ally, because I am no longer a young person, even if I think I'm young at heart, it's not the same, is I need us to show up for young people. I need us to show up for our young people of color, especially our young women of color. I need us to show up for our young LGBTQ youth, especially our young trans and gender non-conforming young people. I need us to show up for our poor young people, our young people with disabilities, our immigrant young people. I need us to show up for them. Everyone should be outraged at what happened in McKinney, Texas to young people, particularly to the young woman of color, Dejaria Becton. At the hands of, I would say, overzealous, at best, police officers and racist adults in their community. No young people should have to confront that ever. I need us to be able to show up and stand in solidarity with them, even if we don't always know the right thing to say and the right thing to do. We need to show up for them and show up for them each and every day. Our young people deserve that and need that. All of our young people. Thank you.
All right, and before I hand the mic over to Professor Crenshaw, we're going to show a video. We believe we can make this work. going to give it a moment to warm itself up. Si se puede. Si se, there you go. See? It works. All right, try moving them. Try, Anastasia, try moving over towards me. No, not Elise. Yeah. Okay, now try. Try it again. Just first one.
I think it's part of the audio.
Okay, so turn off that. Don't do that. Yeah, yeah. So we're not going to be able to hear it. Well,
Play it in the background.
okay, yeah. All right. So you're not going to be hearing the video, but Kim will be talking about what you're seeing visually on there, and we can do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, so you can play it while I talk. So, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I am
Good morning.
absolutely, yeah, good morning, yeah. I'm actually on, let's see, I'm 9 hours ahead of myself, so it's like 6 o'clock in the evening for me right now. But it is really a pleasure to be here with you today, and especially a pleasure to share the podium with a new colleague and friend, and Terry O'Neill, who has been in the trenches with the African American Policy Forum and the campaign that I'm going to talk about called Why We Can't Wait for the last 15 months. What I want to do is sort of frame some of the images that you're seeing here through reference to intersectionality. But in particular, what I want to do is problematize what I call now intersectional erasure. So intersectionality is in somewhat of a contradictory period now. It's on everybody's tongues. People talk about intersectionality. Everyone nods as though they know what it's about. And then they proceed to talk about issues and create policy in ways that deny every fundamental premise of intersectionality. So I want to think about how we got to this space and just give you some examples of how current public policy, particularly on racial justice, that has been packaged through something called My Brother's Keeper, is a primary example of intersectional erasure. So let's just start briefly with two different ways that our current administration frames questions having to do with children when they're framed in terms of women and gender, and how they deal with women and gender when it comes to issues on race. So the White House many times has said that when it comes to children's issues, there's really no separation between children's issues and mothers' issues. Working women are key to the health and well-being of children. Children's life opportunities and chances are completely tied up in the well-being, economic, social, and political of their mothers. So it's a progressive frame that says we can't talk about children without talking about their mothers. The president even goes on to say that the health of the nation is so important that we not only have to talk about mothers, we have to talk about mothers-to-be, we have to talk about girls, we have to talk about their dreams, we have to understand that realizing their dreams is key to realizing the dreams of the nation. Yet when the conversation moves to girls of color, when the conversation moves to boys of color, the dreams of girls and the well-being of their mothers completely drops out of the equation. So when the president announced last February that his singular racial justice initiative was going to be framed as My Brother's Keeper, at that very moment, he created a dichotomy between the way we talk about families when race is not part of the conversation, and the way we talk about families when race is part of the conversation. The main difference being, when we talk about young youth of color, we don't talk about women, we don't talk about girls, we don't talk about patriarchy, We act as though we can advance the interests of boys of color without talking about their mothers at all. We talk, and the conversation is more or less a conversation that suggests that boys of color are the most critically challenged youth in our society. We talk about those challenges in a way that suggests that we can address those issues without recognizing the fact that most boys of color, most black boys in particular, and most black girls are actually raised in families in which their mothers are the primary wage earners. So if we look at many of these problems as problems of economic underdevelopment, social marginalization, the defunding of the public sector, there is no way that we can advance the interests of youth of color without having a gender analysis front and center in that framework, right? So what we have been doing over the last year is to try to challenge all of the assumptions that make it make sense to talk about communities of color without talking about women and girls. Now, what might some of those assumptions be, and how have we been trying to do it? Well, one of the things that we decided to do was actually challenge the claims that have been made that say that the evidence simply supports the fact that the boys are worse off. And because the boys are worse off, we have to start there. And that suggests that we can have a trickle-down approach to racial justice. So if we start with the boys and the men, that eventually girls and women will be advanced. Well, we partnered up with Heidi Hartman from the Institute for Women's Policy Research to actually look at the claims that are being made on behalf of My Brother's Keeper. All of us thought that it was on shaky foundation, but none of us knew how shaky the foundation actually was. It turns out that when Heidi actually looked at all of the claims that were made on behalf of MBK in its first 6-month evaluation, it turned out that 75% of the claims are not claims specific to boys and men at all. They are claims that have to do with racial inequality across the board. I'll give you an example. One of the main claims is that black boys are disproportionately born to single-headed families, and those single-headed families are disproportionately poor. Now, that's true about boys, but it's true about girls as well. Right? Another claim, children who live in low-income communities have disproportionate negative outcomes when it comes to education. That's true for boys, and it's true for girls as well. So one after another claim like that was made on behalf of supporting a gender-exclusive program, when in fact all of the data had to do with boys as well as girls, right? So one of the things that we noticed and learned in this is that many times the frames do more work than the facts. In fact, all the facts in the world won't help you if the frame that people have is a frame that tells them to reject the facts. So what we know our work is now is work to actually challenge the frames that say, number one, people are poor because they live in families that are not traditional nuclear family households, right? Frames that tell us that families are broken if they don't look like traditional families. Frames that tell us that that poverty is associated with choices that women make rather than their social economic value in the marketplace, right? These are the frames that have been used to advance essentially a neoliberal and post-racial devolution of responsibility for families. So it creates a real challenge for us to figure out what we need to do to challenge those frames. What you're looking at is one approach that we've been taking at the grassroots level to try to challenge these frames. One of the things that we know is that this contemporary My Brother's Keeper frame is the product of two problems. One is the failure of anti-racism to have a gender critique. And second, the failure of a mainstream feminist frame to really have a race critique. That's why I call it an intersectional failure. So for the last 20 years, there has been a constant drumbeat of argument that said Moynihan was right, right? And so for those of you who are younger than me, I'll say that Daniel Patrick Moynihan created an argument in the 60s that basically said that all of the structural and institutional reforms that were being undertaken at the time to address racial inequality were going to be ineffective as long as the black family was shaped by a matriarchal structure. And the problem with racial inequality was associated with the idea that black women were disproportionately heads of households, they disproportionately exercised leadership in their communities, they disproportionately worked outside of the home. These were all problems that Moynihan said needed to be fixed before racial inequality could itself be fixed. So he advocated for a stance of benign neglect, step back from active intervention, and create other kinds of social and cultural interventions so the families in black communities could be made more like the families of today. Now, here's where the problem rested. Many in the African American community defended families, not on the basis of the fact that, well, the reason why these families are doing poorly is because of women's position in the workforce. Instead, they defended it by saying, no, we embrace patriarchy just like everyone else. That's number one. And number two, the mainstream response saw this basically as a race problem, not as a gender problem. So what do we have now, 30, 40, 50 years later? We have an understanding of families in poverty that now blames women and blames families themselves for their impoverishment. We have lost welfare as we know it, partly because of the use of black family stereotypes to attack. And now all of us are subject to the consequences of that because the social safety net has been shredded using this stereotype of black families, right? So it's in all of our interests to push back against this intersectional erasure. And it has to start by challenging these frames like My Brother's Keeper that suggest that the problems that need to be addressed, number one, are problems of choices that are being made by women and those choices having a negative effect on the boys that come out of those families. And number two, we have to challenge the idea that the main way and the main approach to dealing with social problems is through punishment and through carrot and stick kind of approaches, which is what My Brother's Keeper is. So what we've been doing is going around the country having town hall hearings. What we know is that this current frame about My Brother's Keeper came from commissions, blue ribbon commissions, and town hall hearings and hearings at the congressional level and at the state level that asked the question, what are we going to do about these scary boys of color? And the answer was, well, we're going to create mentorship programs. We're going to create internships and other kinds of interventions that have nothing to do with the structural reasons that workers in general are losing and workers of color are particularly losing, and families led by working women of color are at the bottom. We know that we can create a counter-narrative to that by using that same framework. So what we've been doing is going around the country. We've had town hall hearings in Atlanta and in New York and Los Angeles, and just yesterday we had one here in partnership with Now in New Orleans. What we've been trying to do is lift up the truth behind many of the statistics that people don't know about. So one statistic that I want to share, the median net wealth for African American women is $100. I want you just to think about that. The median wealth for black women is $100. The median wealth for Latinas is $120. Wealth is what creates your well-being. Wealth is what determines whether you live in a neighborhood that has healthy food options or not. Wealth is what determines what kind of school you can send your children to. Wealth is what determines whether you can ride out an economic downturn or not. Wealth is what determines whether or not a health care crisis becomes a disaster or not. Wealth is what you pass on to your children. if the majority of children live in households where the median net wealth is $100, what is that telling us about where the interventions need to be, right? We're not talking about mentorship as the key. What we have to talk about is economic, social, political interventions that are family-based, not gender-based, that are based on the families we have now, not on the families that we wish we can go back to. Right? There's no one. I want to end with just a couple of facts and then a challenge about allyship. There's a conversation now, thank goodness is happening, called Black Lives Matter. And it's dealing with the particulars of anti-Black racism and the way that it's being played out in punishment regimes, in school-to-prison pipeline, in police brutality, in mass incarceration. It's all vital and critical that we see this as an important feminist movement, not just a race movement. We have to see it as a feminist movement. And that means that women have to be not only leaders in the movement, but they have to be represented in the actual problems that are talked about. So many people think that the school-to-prison pipeline is just about boys. We just released a report this year called Black Girls Matter. We said, well, let's see what's actually happening with Black girls. We found, using data that was there, that was released by the Department of Education, that across the country, while Black boys were 3 times more likely to be suspended than white boys, Black girls were 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. 6 times. When we look more closely in New York and Boston, it was 10 and 11 times more likely, right? This is a race and a gender problem. It is an intersectional problem that frequently doesn't get talked about because it's seen as a boy problem when we talk about race, and suspension in school-to-prison pipeline doesn't get talked about at all when we talk about girls and women in education. That's an intersectional failure. We have to bring these discourses together. Second example, we've started a campaign called Say Her Name. Say Her Name is an effort to integrate women and gender into the current discourse about police misconduct. We started this when we were marching in New York in the aftermath of the Eric Garner indictment. We had a poster with 20 women who'd been killed by the police. People were astonished. They didn't know that women are also killed by the police. Some people were just in shock, didn't know anything about it. Some people gave us thumbs up, but there was also a group of people who were not at all happy that we were trying to lift up the names of women and girls who have been killed by the police. So many of these issues are seen as exclusively male when they are not. That's number one. And then the effort to try to integrate women and girls into it has been a second layer of activism. It's a layer of activism that is, again, an intersectional possibility if we can figure out how to be better allies. And this is where I want to end. I like to tell this story because it is the source of where I started thinking about intersectionality. When I was in law school, at the end of our first year, which many of you know, it's like boot camp. And so at the end of the first year, everyone goes through a ritual of some kind of crazy mad drinking at some point. And so I was in a study group with 2 other African-American men, and one of the men was a member of a very elite drinking club at Harvard called the Fly Club. Its eliteness was marked by the fact that the game room was literally game room. There were heads of animals from African safaris all around the room. Teddy Roosevelt shot this one, and so-and-so shot that one. This is a man's space. And up until this time, it had been a white man's space until our friend became a member, and so he wanted to invite us to be the first African-American guests, his guests at the Fly Club. Now, my other male friend and I looked at each other and said, okay, now what's our allyship going to be when we get up in this place? How are we going to how are we going to support each other? And we both had, agreement that we were not going to take any, I'll say stuff, but you know what the real word was. And when we got there, we got each other. So we get to the door, and of course it's got one of these big proverbial, things, and you got to go bam, bam, bam. And so we knock, and our friend opens the door and quickly steps out and shuts it behind him. Now, in my view, this is the beginning of the stuff we're not going to take. So I assume the not going to take no stuff posture. Right? And so does my friend. And so our fly club friend says, oh, I feel really badly. I forgot to tell you something. And I'm like, what? Right? You can't have black friends or something like that. And he said, no, that's not the problem. That's not the problem. I just forgot to say, Kim can't come in the front door. She has to go around to the back door because we have a policy that doesn't allow women to walk through the front door. Black people can walk through the front door, but women can't. Now, in my view, this is included in the rider, that we're not going to take any stuff. And so I'm like, well, we're not coming in. My friend, on the other hand, is halfway through the door. So I use this as a reminder that we can have provisional understandings about allyship, but the fine print is where the rubber really meets the road. So, what kind of allies are we to one another when we get to the door? Are we going to say, hey, it doesn't apply to me, I can walk in? Or does the allyship mean if we don't both walk in this door together, then none of us will walk into this door together? In concluding, Terry O'Neill has been the person over this last year who refused to walk in the door without us. Terry has refused to allow my brother's keeper to go uncommented on. She has refused to allow this intersectional erasure to continue. She has committed herself and now, and all of you, to the kind of allyship we need. And it's not just allyship for women and girls of color. We have to recognize that this thing that's happening to us is going to happen to all women. The same levels of family dissolution that happened to black people in the 1960s are happening to white families today. So if you can imagine what My Brother's Keeper will look like for white men in the future, don't think it's a figment of your imagination, because there are plans to expand this kind of framing to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim and Amy. I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been to hear you speak. And let me say that no, I am not walking through the door. We are not taking that stuff unless we walk through the door together. And the reason for that is that when I first became politically active in the mid-1990s, right, I discovered there was a NOW chapter in Louisiana. Who knew? That's my bias coming out, and for all my Louisiana friends, I am so sorry. I did not know. Somebody told me you should go to a NOW meeting, and on the wall there was a sign. It said, "Sexism, racism, homophobia, connect the dots." And the reason that I'm not walking through the door is because I learned how to do organizing through the NOW chapter. And the NOW chapters I've been involved with ever since. It's really good. On that note, let me just say two things. We are getting close to the end of this plenary session, and I want to pick up on both what you, Amy, and you, Kim, have said. What do we do, really, at the grassroots level? I do want to talk about What should we, as a women's organization, as the National Organization for Women, where should we be going to end the intersectional erasure? NOW's purpose is to take action, right? To take action to bring about societal change. And by action, we really mean policy. I think that one of the things we absolutely must begin to focus on is the disparities amongst women across racial and ethnic lines. When you look at that number, and let me just fill in the rest of the story on median net worth. And by the way, $100 net worth for African American women, that's single women, unmarried women, they can have $100 net worth and be bringing in six-figure salaries. These are lawyers and accountants and physicians, and they're making good money, but their house is underwater, perhaps. Very often they were targeted and suckered into abusive subprime mortgages. And this is why their net worth, if the house is worth less than what they paid for it, and that brings their net worth down, even though their current income can support an abusive mortgage payment that they're making. So when the rainy day comes, they have nothing to fall back on. So that's part of the thing. But here's the rest of the story on net worth. $100 for African American women. $120 for Latinas. $41,500 for white women. Single women, unmarried. These are all along that. We should not begrudge the $41,500 that is the median net worth of white women. You're talking about women of color and white women who may be 50 years old, and that ain't enough to retire on, as we all know. What we need to be doing as allies, and what I believe we need to be moving forward with as allies, is demand an end to the disparity. Note the disparity. Problematize the disparity. Refuse to accept the disparity. Insist on public policies that will eliminate those disparities, that will bring our sisters of color up to a higher level. We could retire in dignity when we reach retirement age, where we could afford to help our kid with a down payment on a house in a good school district, where we could afford to have something to fall back on if we get laid off in an economic downturn. If that cushion is not there for our sisters of color, it is not there for us. And that is what we need to do. And I will say one final thing about that. I have heard, actually not from women's rights activists, but I have heard when I have voiced this, we need to really attack the disparities. What I've heard is, well, don't you think you want to be careful about being divisive within the women's movement? And I was actually surprised by that. I think it is uniting. I think when we say, if it happens to our sister, it is good as happens to me, and we will fix it for our sisters because that fixes it for me, that is uniting, it is not divisive. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for your remarks. It was brilliant and amazing. And we are now on a break. Yes, thank you.